Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Alex Katehakis, and today is Monday, August 16th, 2021. This is the Mirror of Intimacy webinar, and today's topic is rage. With a pretty provocative topic, I think, and a topic that we don't typically associate with sex and sexuality, but human relatedness is really what Mirror of Intimacy is all about. All the different ways that we relate, how we manage and look at our own issues, how those issues impact our partners, and then the dynamic in relationships, which always impact our sex lives. So we'll see if we can weave this together, especially through your questions and answers, or your questions, maybe my answers. So for starters, we have a beautiful piece of poetry and quotation mark from Robert Frost, which is completely apropos of what's going on in the world today. He writes, "It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night, an age. Someone had better be prepared for rage." So think about how much is packed into those two little sentences. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night, an age. So think about the age we're living in now, where on any given night, we're concerned, we're scared, we're worried. And yet it's not just a night, we are in an age of incredible shifting and changing. And we better be prepared for the long haul. He says someone had better be prepared for rage. So this morning I've been listening to the news like many of you and thinking about these people in Afghanistan that are flocking to the airport to try to get out because there is a night of dark intent ahead of them, with the Taliban perhaps and looking like they're going to take back Afghanistan. And so these people are preparing for an era of rage, an era of terror that will be enacted on them. And so we have to consider this global rage that's taking place right now, that we are in an age of incredible change. And with that comes a beautiful open-heartedness and extreme hostility as these forces converge, battle it out, try to figure it out, you name it. When we think of a violent, uncontrollable anger, we think of rage, and rage always signals danger if you are the recipient of it. If someone is raging in your presence, excuse me, it doesn't matter if you're a wee child or if you are a grown adult, there is a fear and a terror that comes from rage. And that is because it absolutely hits the primitive part of our brain and our nervous system in our bodies. And so with that comes what we call a hyperarousal. The organism itself is at the ready to do battle because it's a fear state. And this is just how we're wired. We are wired for both love and relationships, and for battle and for war. And we're highly predatory creatures, and we can be incredibly cruel and mean and humiliating and dangerous to our fellow man. And I think we are in this age of enlightenment trying to work with our higher cortical functions, our higher selves, in order to keep some sort of peace in the world. But on a daily basis, we see humanity slipping into this limbic state, this reptilian, cruel, unthinking state. The word rage telegraphs this unstoppable superhuman power that destroys anything in its path. And we think about a raging river, a raging hurricane, a raging epidemic like we have going on right now with the coronavirus planet-wide. There is a pervasiveness that is beyond our humanity to stop. And so when we're in the presence of something like that, we typically hunker down and look for safety and try to figure out how to best take care of ourselves. So as I said, our brain is wired for this sort of assault, this kind of rage, just as every other human animal. And when humans and other animals are terrified, when they're scared and they're desperate, they attack. And we see this on multiple levels in humanity. So really, I'm talking about the macro and the micro. The micro would be our individual lives, our individual experiences, our individual problems with our own anger and perhaps rage, which we inherited from our family of origin. So this is a reverberating topic. It's not a small topic, and I don't in any way purport to have a final opinion or analysis about what is right and what is wrong and how to manage rage. But I do think it's important to have a conversation that opens space around looking at it, because I think when we talk about rage and we really understand what it is, we might be just a little bit less afraid of it in our own interpersonal interactions with people. So when we see red, and I've had clients tell me that they have red outs, which is akin to a blackout, like if you're drinking or you're not drinking. Let's say you've had some sort of vagal response in the body and you just passed out because you got sick. These red outs are when people see red. And that's because this primitive part of the brain is so activated that it paralyzes the slower, more accurate operating system. So many years ago, Dan Siegel, who has really done an enormous amount of work and service in bringing neuroscience to us in a way that's digestible and understandable, gave a little tutorial on the human brain that I'll attempt to replicate here. But he said, if you, and you can do this with me as you're watching, if you take your hand and you fold your thumb into your hand and you fold your fingers over it, this is quasi-anatomical structure of the brain. And if you consider that the wrist is the brain stem going down into the body, and this would be the prefrontal cortex right here where your fingers are. So the prefrontal cortex is the largest operating system in the brain. It's the slowest operating system in the brain, and it needs the most oxygen, which is why on airplanes they tell us to put our oxygen masks on first before we help children, because they have their brains don't need as much oxygen the younger that they are. They do need it, but we need it more so than they do. So we can help them after we're getting oxygen. So there's a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio, and he talked about the slow and accurate route versus the quick and dirty route. So the slow and accurate route is that you see someone who's talking to you and you see them getting angry, but you can really cull your higher cortical functions online and you can assess, is this person dangerous or are they just having a bad day? But if there's rage coming at you and you feel terror, and like you're going to be assaulted, you can no longer hold your prefrontal cortex online. And all you have is the limbic system here. And your thumbnail would be the equivalent of the amygdala, specifically the right amygdala, that's registering danger and run for your life. And so you have effectively flipped your lid, because you no longer have these higher cortical functions, and it's really the quick and dirty route. It's the rage and terror is going straight into the amygdala, down into the body, and the signal is to run for your life, to run for safety. And so that is how this fear system actually works. And when your thinking part of your brain is literally, it's called being hijacked in a sort of easy way to remember it, or we talk about it being offline, which doesn't actually completely happen, but it's certainly impaired. That means that the lower, more animalistic, reptilian, visceral part of the brain takes over, and we behave like animals. We behave in beastly ways. We either start fighting for our lives, which can be anything from punching, hitting, scratching, spitting, kicking, anything we can to get away, because we know that our bodily safety and really our sanity is at stake if we can't get away. And so we do everything we can to escape that rage. And that kind of rage, when a human being rages at another person regularly, chronically, incessantly, that is a mental dysfunction. because that means that they cannot regulate the upset that's coming towards them. They cannot manage their anxiety. And so they have a very quick fuse, is what we often call it. So we have something from someone watching the webinar here who's made a statement, and she writes, my husband raped me twice before marriage. This was 40 years ago. Didn't know it was rape. My therapist told me 2 years ago it was. Said rape is rage. Is that true? He's a passive, quiet guy, yet aggressively sexual with 15 women before meeting me. I can't say whether it's true or not because I wasn't there and I don't know your husband, but marital rape was put on the books in the 1970s, which seems unbelievably late when you think about it. And so if you are overpowered, if somebody's having sex with you to discharge their rage or their anger, and you are not really present, you are starting to dissociate, you're scared, you're not really in your body, we could call that, marital rape the same way we call date rape. It has to be fully consensual. You've got to be present. You've got to be able to say, hey, you know what? You seem agitated right now or angry. I don't want to do this with you right now. But if you're so frozen because you feel terrified and you can't say yes or no, then it's likely that that would be, in the consideration of marital rape. But again, I think you have to sort that out for yourself. That's not something somebody can tell you. And, one of the things that she made in the statement is that her husband's a very passive guy. And we've all known people that are super passive, very quiet. They never get angry. Those people are often full of rage. They are full of dissociated rage, repressed rage. They don't express it appropriately. So anger is a very useful emotion. And I think it's important to make this distinction. Oftentimes we're allergic to anger, and I see this a lot with females that are in heterosexual relationships with males. Men have a tendency to be aggressive, louder than females, physically oftentimes larger than females are in bone structure and muscle mass and everything. And that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of women that aren't physically fit and able to hold their own. It just means there are some gender differences. And so when men get upset, when they get anxious, they can get really angry and loud. And women get very, very nervous in the face of that anger. And I think we do some men a disservice. And again, I'm making the distinction between anger and rage when we collapse in the face of that anger. And if you had a very angry father or a very angry mother, you're going to have a hypersensitivity to that kind of anger. It's going to be very difficult for you to regulate it. So those are two different things going on. But if somebody is generally regulated and you're generally in relationship with a male, whether it's a teenage son or a son of any age or a partner, and that person comes in and they're angry when they get home because they had a really bad day. It was like one thing after another went bad and they're just in a foul mood. To start to scream rage or abuse is really not honoring a discharge of that energy. And being able to reflect back and say, hey, I get that you had a really hard day today. I'm going to go work out, or I'm going to go for a walk, or maybe you might want to go work out. And let's, do what we have to do together. How can I support you in regulating this anger? But to shut anger down is not a good idea. We seem to privilege, happiness, joy, lightheartedness, play, laughter, but we don't like fear or anger or sadness. We want all of that to go away, and that is a disintegrated state. So when you are able to feel all your feelings and your partner is too, it's going to be a roller coaster of a ride. That's how relationships are. They're kind of messy and unpredictable, but they fall within a range, which we could call, a range of tolerance for both parties. And sometimes they can get up to the edges of that range. And that's okay. It's about, can we get to the edges of that anger and bring ourselves back? If we have an argument with each other, how escalated is this going to get? And am I going to start to downregulate myself because I don't want to do something stupid? I don't want to end up, screaming or throwing things or assaulting my partner. So I need to be able to get my higher cortical functions, again online, or not let them go offline, so that I can breathe or take a time out and say, look, this is going nowhere good. We need to stop. We need to take a time out and think about what it is we're actually even arguing about right now. Sometimes I know in my own arguments, my husband and I are actually arguing for the same thing. It just sounds different. The languaging sounds different, but we're talking about the same thing. And we're actually in agreement, but it's happening in this kind of heated, argumentative way, which is really silly. So that's why it's important to stop and say, what are we actually fighting about right now? What's going on? Rage, when it flips into rage, is really a combination of anxiety, pain, and often shame. And so if you think about if you've ever been in a rage, what is it that precipitated that rage, and why did you unleash so many feelings that you were out of control? And did the event, was it really commensurate with the reaction that you had? Or do you have the same reaction to everything? It doesn't matter what it is, whether somebody put your shirt in the wrong drawer or, crack the windshield on your car. Are those the same issues? Do they both warrant the same amount of affect? So it's important to really look at your own patterns around this issue. Do you have an anger problem? Do you have a rage problem? Do you emotionally abuse the people in your household? Because you can't seem to regulate the feelings that you have. Someone has a question here. Are there any exercises with our partner that we can practice to keep those higher cortical functions regulated and online during arguments with them? Well, part of it is being in close proximity to the other person. So you're looking at me on a screen right now, but we're in fairly close proximity. If I was across the room, I would appear smaller to you. And human beings scan for salience. And that means we're scanning for that which is important to us. So when we walk into a room, we're scanning the whole room, and typically, initially, unconsciously and automatically, we're looking for safety. Is this a safe space? How many people are in this room? It's happening in, milliseconds. These assessments are happening so quickly. So when we're at a distance, we're at a predatory stance. When we're at a distance, the further away from you I am, the more of a predatory process is taking place for me, because I'm looking you up and down. I can see everything that's going on, but I'm not close in enough to see the whites of your eyes. I'm not close in enough to actually start to unconsciously read your pupils and this tone of your skin and the various nuances in your face. So when we're close in, when we're 2 feet apart and making eye contact, we're much less likely to start screaming, getting angry, and going into a rage. People don't rage at each other in close proximity. It happens in the movies, in an extreme close-up when someone's, quote, in someone's face, but that rarely really happens in human relationships. So I would advise that when you have an upset or something upsetting going on with your partner, or you start to escalate, you check your breathing and make sure that you are breathing, deeply breathing, not just hyperventilating or breathing from your chest, but down into your belly. And you ask your partner if the two of you can just sit down for a minute face to face and talk to each other. Because when two people are walking around and circling each other, or they're in their peripheral vision, you've got to set up for a massive fight about to take place. And in that knee to knee, eyeball to eyeball setting, you can actually make contact with each other's humanity. And remember that there's a person there. There's a person there that's hurting, that's confused, that doesn't understand, that wants to be understood in the same way that you do. So you're not better than, you're not right. You're upset also, and the two of you are reacting to each other's autonomic cues, which is likely what happened in your family of origin. All right, so we have a couple of questions here. I appreciate the perspective on helping the person who is the target of rage. Can you speak to regulation tools and not in the moment, but ways to lower the pressure long before the pressure cooker blows? Well, I think this is a mindfulness practice. It's about looking at our own patterns, because our patterns start in early infancy. They continue to evolve all through childhood, teenage years, adulthood. And when you look back from any vantage point at your patterns, you will see the genesis of them, and you will see how you recreate them over and over again. And so when you can intervene on your patterns, when you notice that you get snippy, that you're impatient, that you interrupt when your partner's speaking, that your tendency is to get up and walk around when they're speaking instead of sitting still and listening because your anxiety's going up. And what you really need to do in that moment is say to your partner, you know what, I need to just stop and take a deep breath right now because I'm getting distracted or I'm having a hard time listening to you. And if you're on the receiving end of that, you have to be careful not to feel, insulted by it or offended by it or shamed by it, because there's another person on the other side of this. So this is what it means to be in relationship. It is not this happily ever after myth where you just go skipping down the yellow brick road. It means that you're really going to have to roll up your sleeves and look at your own issues and name them in the argument also, when you've gotten through the heat of it, to say, I was out of line when I said this, or I could have been listening better to you, or I'm sorry that I always do this, or I often interrupt you and I don't let you finish what you're saying, right? So whatever my issues are that have to do with my anxiety, I have to own. And that's really what it means to be vulnerable. We talk about vulnerability a lot, but how much do we exercise it? How much do we want to point the finger at our partner and say that person is fundamentally flawed, as opposed to I'm fundamentally flawed. I'm a human being and I've got these issues and my partner is triggering them, and I'm going to look at me, not be accusatory of him or her. How can you regulate your anger? How do you control your triggers? Well, I think, noticing when you get angry. Most of us, if we're lucky, we walk around in a fairly regulated state. So as you're listening to this, you might be getting a little dysregulated, especially if you don't like what I'm saying or you don't agree with me. You might be starting to get a little heated. But if you're saying, well, that sounds reasonable, you're still in a regulated state, meaning you have good heart rate variability, your palms aren't sweating, you're able to listen, maybe you're taking notes, you're present for the most part. Any perturbation in the system, let's say somebody walks into your office and throws a glass against the wall and it shatters, you're going to jump and you're going to get a little scared. That's a dysregulation or a perturbation in the system. And in that moment, that's immediately that activity would go into the quick and dirty route. It goes straight into the fear center, and boom, you are on high alert to figure out whether you need to run for your life or get under your desk or get some assault weapon to fight back because somebody's about to attack you, right? All of that happens super fast. If it looks like your neighbor down the hall was playing a practical joke on you, you might think, oh, wow, this is the kind of stuff this person does all the time. It's really annoying. I'm kind of getting sick of it, but I'm not in danger because I know they're just kind of weird that way. But I am going to do something about it because I don't want to deal with it anymore. That is still a fairly regulated state. In both of those situations, though, all we can do is really notice what our tendencies are. Some of us have a tendency to go to anger and rage swiftly. Others have a tendency to get very quiet and to dissociate, to avoid conflict and conversation. And oftentimes people that are dysregulated with anger and rage tend to get in relationship with people that are avoidant, because those people will take it, because they dissociate, because they grew up with a rageful parent and their nervous system is geared towards just checking out. So there can be bullets going off in the background and they're okay because they're not there. Their nervous system is overregulated, or they are dissociated, meaning part of their brain is disconnected from their body, which is a different problem than the problem we're talking about right now. Someone writes, I've been diagnosed with multiple autoimmune diseases, severe fibromyalgia, almost organ failure, and just recently a functional medicine doctor used my illness, tied it to my father's chronic rage and mother's histrionic disorder. Well, I'm deeply sorry that you're suffering like that, because I know how painful these autoimmune disorders can be. And I do believe that they have their genesis early on, when the body can only take so much. For years, I had no idea I was in constant fight, flight, or freeze mode. Now that I'm trying to piece it together and heal, do you have any suggestions for the first steps to healing? I now seem to have rage and resentment towards my parents that makes me so sad. Well, I would recommend that in addition to continuing to work with your functional medicine doctor, that you find a good therapist who's really trained in somatic healing, somatic practices, so they can slowly start to bring you back into your body, so you can feel today what you couldn't feel then. I don't know that this is going to be a cure for the chronic pain you're in, but it may start to soften and mitigate some of those processes if you can tolerate them. But yes, being angry and not having all of that turned inward and jamming up the nervous system and have you producing, mounds and mounds of cortisol all through your childhood, which creates all sorts of problems in the nervous system, is essential for you continuing to try to support your system, so you can feel better, even if it's just a little bit better than you've been feeling. Can you speak about self-abuse out of rage? Well, I know there are people who have, um, self-injurious behaviors where they will bang their head against a wall or cut themselves or hurt themselves in other ways. And these are severe regulatory problems, again, that whose genesis are in childhood, in early childhood. And this can go back as far as the third trimester of pregnancy. If there was a mother who was profoundly dysregulated during her pregnancy, all of the neurochemicals from her system go through the placenta into the infant's emerging nervous system. If she continues that dysregulation in early infancy and through childhood, there are a whole host of issues that can evolve. So I don't know what your particular situation is. But again, if you are engaging in self-injurious behavior, you must be in psychotherapy. The only way out of these problems is in the presence of a trusted other who can regulate you in real time. Because this starts to re-educate the system, if you will. These circuits that are down, these faulty belief systems and negative thoughts that assault us on any given day require another human being, require a witness that will help you start to change these things. And I'm sorry to say it's a slow process, but you're going to be 5 years older anyway. So why not be 5 years healthier along the road than waiting or hoping that this is just going to go away? Or worse yet, getting into a relationship with someone thinking that they should just tolerate this, or they should be the ones to fix us or change us, which isn't fair to other people. So I would recommend that you find a therapist that's skilled in working with self-harming. Sometimes I feel like my partner doesn't express his anger, and then I'm expressing it. During fights, it's difficult for me to differentiate between us. Can you recommend anything for us? Well, I would think you probably would benefit from couples therapy, but also for you to look at what happens that you're taking his anger on, and how it's like you take his anger on and then you give it back to him, you project it back to him. So he probably feels like you're the crazy one, or you're the one who's assaulting him all the time, when really it's crazy making for you. So how do you step out of that dynamic? Because you're in a wicked dynamic with him. You are perpetrating on him from a victim position because you feel victimized by his lack of whatever it is, motivation, true expression of his anger, and then you turn around and let him have it. So I would think couples therapy would be enormously helpful and fruitful in that arena. Can you speak to anger and rage reactions towards our children? How to help repair past emotional wounds you've inflicted through overreacting? Well, there's a great book called How to Talk to Children So Children Will Listen. It's been around forever. And maybe it's called How to Talk to Kids So Kids Will Listen. I'm not sure, but if you type it into Amazon, you'll find it. And the best that we can do with our children is, first of all, work on our anger issues so we don't keep perpetrating it on them, but to apologize after you've been angry or cross. Sometimes it's not inappropriate to get angry. If your child is about to put their hand on a hot stove and you yell no from across the room and you've got a rageful or angry look on your face, that's imprinting on them that that is a dangerous situation and they shouldn't do it and they should never do it again. And so if they start to cry or get upset, that's an appropriate reaction for your anger coming at them. But at some point in that whole cycle, it's incumbent upon the parent to go regulate that child's upset, right? To make eye contact with them, to pick them up, to soothe them, to hold them, to say, I'm sorry, I was so angry with you, but I was scared and I don't want you to hurt yourself. So that would be one example where anger is appropriate. Another time where maybe you just fly off the handle because you just have nothing left internally to give. You've been working all day, you're in the middle of COVID, they're at home, they're whining, they need something from you, and people have been needing something from you all day, and you've just had it, and you're short, then it's okay afterwards to apologize for that, to say that wasn't the best reaction from me. I'm sorry I said that to you. Let me help you with what you need now. Or sometimes I need some space away. And when I tell you to be quiet, I really need you to be quiet. So there are many ways to repair. And that's the key here, that when there is a rupture, that you repair in real time. You don't wait for days on end and give them the cold shoulder, really with anyone, an adult relationship or a child. And that's how we learn. And that's how relationships go. But if you are chronically hurting a child, at some point, you really have to look at, why do I keep doing this? It's not okay to keep punching somebody and then apologizing and punching and apologizing. At some point, you just need to stop punching them. And I'm not suggesting you're punching your children. I'm just saying that to make a really, illustrative point here about why it's our responsibility, again, to look at our patterns. So Dan Siegel's book, again, Parenting from the Inside Out, is a really great book still to look at, because that book is all about looking at your issues and the intergenerational transmission of our traumas and how we perpetrate those going forward and what we can do to stop that. My husband has been a sex addict for many of our very long marriage, many years. He has also raged at me very abusively throughout. He's been sober for a year, but continues to rage once a month. He puts a lot of energy into controlling his anger. He's not approachable due to my fear of setting him off, and therefore stuck in being unable to heal our marriage. Well, this is a problem because while your husband has maybe been abstinent, he's not emotionally sober. And so this is no different than the dry drunk, the person that just stops drinking, but who's still surly, angry, mean, inappropriate. So your husband needs to really work on his anger, whether it's through, an anger workshop, anger management classes, or, seeing a psychiatrist and getting a psychiatric evaluation, because maybe he needs medication. Maybe his brain is just really hot and he can't manage it himself. But, for someone like that, who's got that kind of a rage problem, I would say, a mindfulness practice, an anger management group, and medication and anything else he needs to do. If he's really interested in healing this marriage with you, then he would be interested and curious about why he keeps pushing you away. The only other thing I might say about that is that that rage can also be precipitated from shame from all of his years of cheating and lying to you. And it may be because he's being dishonest that he really doesn't want to be in this marriage. And again, these are all hypotheses. I don't know you, but in my thinking, if somebody wants to push someone away, they're not inviting them forward. They're not really working on themselves. It may be because they just don't want to be in the relationship and they don't want to say. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. Wondering if you might speak to the concept of eroticized rage. Well, eroticized rage, this concept was first really conceptualized by Robert Stoller, who talked about sexualized hostility. And then later, Patrick Carn termed the phrase eroticized rage. And the notion behind this is that people use sex in order to act out their hostility, their anger, their rage. Sex can be an incredibly loving and beautiful act of connection, or it can be an act of violence and everything in between. And when people use sex to discharge their anger, to discharge their rage, often against women, if they are heterosexual, that certainly doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of gay and lesbian people who use sex as a way to discharge anger or rage. Then we're talking about the erotization of rage. So it's not safe to get angry, or let's say I'm very passive aggressive in our relationship. I'm super agreeable. I don't ever ask for what I want and need, but then I go do what I want to do when I want to do it. And that doing that behind your back is an act of rage. And if I'm cheating on you, it's sexualized or eroticized rage. I think I hold my feelings in more than I let them out, especially anger. My default is to not be troublesome. I come from an alcoholic family, mother. I do go for unavoidable people in relationships, or else avoid them. I'm addressing this, but it's tough, right? So, Angela, these are deeply seated codependency issues, and they are avoidant issues. So your nervous system is geared towards avoidance of other people, avoidance of conflict. And so you would do really well to be in a women's group where you have a safe container, or even a co-ed group therapy, where people can confront each other in the group in a safe way, where there's a group leader who's modulating it. And those confrontations are small. They're not these big, scary things. It may be that you and I are in a group therapy together, and every time you start to talk, I interrupt you. And you say, when I was growing up, I had a red bike. And I said, oh, I had a red bike too. Like, I'm always interrupting you and annoying, but you don't say anything because you're afraid of the confrontation. A good group leader would say, Angela, what's it like when Alex interrupts you? Because she interrupts you all the time. You see, there's an opening there for you, and a safe place to say, well, I'm really afraid to say this, but I find it annoying. And the therapist will say, well, say more about your annoyance, because you're not really annoyed. You're really pissed. You really don't like me, but you are afraid to say so. And as you're in therapy, group therapy, long enough, at some point you start to build the capacity to be able to say to the other person, I don't like you. I find you, self-centered, and you're always talking about yourself. And what a relief to be able to say that. And not only that, if I'm that person, wow, that's a mirror being held up to me. I now have to look at that. I get that feedback from everybody in my life. I get it from my friends, my family. I lose boyfriends over it. You see, so you're not doing me any favors by not telling me that I'm annoying you. And you're certainly not doing yourself any favors because you keep tolerating me. So the more you can look at the codependency literature, maybe get into CODA, which is a 12-step program, and also get yourself into a group therapy, the better and the faster this will go for you, because this is about building a muscle and being able to tolerate that muscle. over time. And when you do, you start to feel so much better about yourself, because what was stolen from you in that alcoholic household, you get to take back. You get to have your voice, and feel like you matter and be seen in the relationship. Because when you're in a family where you're not being seen, you don't trust others, then you will be activated by the smallest incident, and you'll run away from your own feelings also. Is there a relationship between shame and rage? I would say 100%. I would say a lot of rage comes from shame, and the person is blowing their rage and their shame through the other person, because it's too much for them to say, I feel really ashamed about that, or I don't know how to talk about that, or I hate myself, or I feel broken. I feel like there's something wrong with me. Instead, the assault goes outward into the world. I want you to think about how important it is, to not get even when you are in a situation with somebody who's angry or rageful. We have, wars and destruction, and even within our own country, people getting even with each other, and that just goes nowhere. I think the Dalai Lama, is a great example of someone who has met injustices his entire life, and strong people, women like Indira Gandhi or Mother Teresa, and they've moved mountains when they've taken their anger and their rage at injustice and they've put it into constructive processes. And you can do this in your own relationships. You can do it when you feel righteous indignation at what's going on in the world, to put that energy into action so that you can start by changing yourself. And when you change yourself, you start to change the world. And whether it's for a political cause or socio-economic cause, or for your own health and well-being, for your family, for yourself, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you start to look at this and say, I'm curious about this. Instead of saying I'm an idiot or I'm miserable and nobody wants to be around me and poor me, it's about being curious about what happens that I have such a short fuse. Where did that come from? Because the more we do things, the worse it gets, because we just keep rehearsing it and those patterns just become more and more indelible. We want to interrupt the patterns as best we can. So if you suffer from bouts of rage that terrify the people around you, please do something to take action today. Maybe listening to this conversation was the first step of right action for you today. So thank you. And notice those impulses that catapult you forward, and pay attention to what your triggers are, what gets you, starting to get heated, and what can you do to intervene on them before they happen. And maybe you do need to be on medication, or maybe you just need a mindfulness practice, because you have enough awareness and insight that you think, oh, I can intervene on this. This isn't just a neurochemical response, where I lose it and I don't know what's going on. So somebody writes, and I think this is one last question about, I don't know how to access my anger better. I wasn't allowed to feel anger as a child. And so person feels overwhelmed, they cry, dissociate. And I understand that. I used to cry at the drop of the hat about everything because I couldn't get angry. And also for females, our tendency is to cry. For males, it's to get angry. And I know that's a kind of a gross gender split and divide, but that's why I said in general, we're all sort of wired differently, but females just start shaking and crying as opposed to really feeling this kind of robust energy that can move through the body in a way that's quite powerful once we feel entitled to it. So again, my recommendations for therapy and group therapy are the best things that I have, because when we start to become more neurally integrated, less dissociated, because anger can be as dissociated as terror or fear or pain. Any affect can be dissociated. And when it's dissociated, we are not integrated people. And therapy and 12-step programs are about neural integration, where we become more present, more whole, more able to feel all of our feelings unapologetically, unless, of course, we do something mean that we shouldn't do, but in a way that says, it's okay for me to get angry. I don't like that that happened. And anger can happen in this very tone of voice, where we have a constructive conversation about it and one of us says, I'm sorry, or both of us, and then we drop it and move on. We don't hold on to it in ways that are abusive and hurtful to ourselves and each other. So I hope this has been an enlightening conversation for you today. I hope you can hear that your rage, if you have a problem with the rage, is something you must be compassionate about yourself with. Don't use that rage to club yourself, to beat yourself up, to hurt yourself physically, but to be curious about, how did I get here and what do I need to do? How do I practice loving kindness with myself and get the help I need so I can start to dial this back? So I hope you have a wonderful month and that you enjoy the rest of our summer days here in August. I look forward to seeing you in September. And as always, you can find Mirror of Intimacy on Amazon. If you would leave us a review, we love to hear from you, even if it's one word or one sentence. We always appreciate your words of kindness and what you get from the book. And until then, I'll look forward to seeing you. All right, take care.